everyone, and welcome to this episode of In Terms. I'm your host, Naaman Asghari, and my guest is self-governed. Governed, how's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm good, man. Thanks for jumping back on, especially I don't know, short notice.
Yeah, no problem.
Sorry about that. I wanted to let's just jump right into it. You and I were talking about this loony dollar that Mark Carney wants to propose. Now, I don't know if you consider yourself an expert, but can you explain like what is the euro dollar? Because most people don't know what it is.
Yeah, sure. So essentially, the euro dollar is just U.S. dollars that are created at a bank that's not in the U.S. That's not from the Federal Reserve. So let's say you're a bank in Europe or you're a bank in Bangladesh. You can just create a loan. So you buy like $1 million in U.S. Treasuries. That's your collateral, and then you can give out 10 million in loans in U.S. dollars. So the U.S. has no control over that currency. It's like an external currency that they can't really control with interest rates or any kind of monetary policy. It's just a separate system, and it only functions because the U.S. is a global reserve currency. So the U.S. kind of has to let that happen if they're going to be the main currency of global trade. So it's been a problem for the U.S. It's been what they're trying to, uh, I guess, get out of. So that's the euro dollar. Simply, it's just U.S. dollars that are not created within the U.S. that are out of their control, and it's as far as currencies go, it's very fake currency because it's built on nothing. You have $1 million in backing, and it's 10 million in loans, sometimes higher. Some of these banks are even going higher than a 10x, but it really affects the actual value of the U.S. dollar.
Isn't this
Inflates it.
strictly illegal? It's counterfeiting.
Well, it was made. I think it was made after World War II, um, to help with kind of rebuilding Europe. And then it wasn't used very much. It was used a little bit, and then it kind of went dormant, and then it was brought up. But yeah, it's if you look back at who started doing it, it was coming out of certain families in Europe. So that's why it's called the euro dollar. It was these certain banks in Europe that were doing it, and then expanded. Yeah, I don't know why the U.S. has let it happen, but again, the U.S. was going they were going empire. So that a lot of these kind of things, I think they let roll because really their top export was their dollar, and it allowed them to spend almost unlimited. So there was advantages to having the global reserve currency and being this global empire. A lot of people benefit from it. Not the Americans. Americans did not benefit from it, but like the people who were kind of managing the empire, they definitely did. So yeah, illegal. I don't know if they're benefiting from it. I don't think they really care about that.
And well, like, what's the downside to the U.S.? Is it inflate? Okay, let me ask the question. First of all, um, $1 million in U.S. backed treasuries, you give out 10 million loans. That 9 million that they've created out of thin air, can that come back to the U.S. somehow?
It does. Yeah, it does sometimes. Yeah, they come back. They might. Yeah, it definitely could. Which is what makes the USD so strong. Which is what the U.S. is trying to do. They're trying to devalue their currency so they can bring back manufacturing. They can bring back these production economy, which is a better economy for the people. But if they don't control their currency or their currency is too high, then no one can buy the stuff they make. So even if they did that, they can't sell it to anybody. So yeah, it does do that. It is a problem, and it's what Trump and the crew around him are trying to do. They're trying to pull away from global empire, be a Western, I guess, empire or a kind of that sphere of influence. They want to bring back manufacturing, production jobs. They want to get out of the euro. They don't want to be involved in the eurodollar system. It's called the Triffin dilemma of having the global reserve currency. Um, if you have the global reserve currency, you have to worry about the global financial system, and you generally will take hits on your domestic policies. That could be sacrificing manufacturing jobs to do this. So eventually it becomes too big of a problem for your country. So you have to kind of get out of being the global reserve currency, which is what they're trying to do. Um,
I'm struggling with this, like multiple streams of clown world going on at the same time. The United States is criticizing China for currency manipulation, so devaluing their currency to make their exports more um, appealing. And then yesterday I was watching Buck McYoung. He asked a question to this Conservative Party candidate, and he said, well, Canada has been devaluing its currency and it's violating NAFTA. So is now America getting on board with the devaluation?
I think so. I think right now you're seeing currency wars, which is what this whole loony dollar Carney going against what Trump and they were trying to do. It's essentially a currency war. And how the U.S. is trying to do it. Just we're seeing the tariffs. That's one. So tariffs are going to try to force these other countries to allow them to devalue the currency. Also, it can bring some revenue. It's kind of a two-prong tool. They have to reduce the U.S. debt, which is Dodge. They have to drastically reduce their spending. They're going to have to make it. This whole thing, as far as bringing manufacturing back, it's going to be inflationary, despite what they say. That Stephen Meehan's paper saying it's not necessarily too inflationary by using these tariffs and devaluing the currency, but I think it still will be, which is why they've kind of floated the no income tax. And I think they're going to do it. Whether it's under 150,000, however they do it, I think they're serious when they say that. They have to have low energy, which is kind of where Alberta comes into this, because right now Alberta is essentially the U.S. like that. Most of the energy the U.S. uses comes from Alberta, so that's very, very important. And then they have to have new revenue streams, which is the sovereign wealth fund. So essentially, the U.S. government will be able to fund either a technology. They do this anyways. Like DARPA has done this, like Facebook, they've done this, but they want to do it out in the open. So they're going to fund either as a company or a technology. They'll take a piece of that company, and as it grows, they could make money off the appreciation of the company or a dividend, whatever it would be. They could also do this with bullets, just simply. They buy a lot of bullets. They could have a stake in that company, whoever makes the bullets, and then they could also make money off their spending, essentially. So I think they're going to use that sovereign wealth fund as a major revenue tool, which could replace some of the income tax money, could replace some other funding, and then maybe they'll do the internal external currency like China, which will allow them to kind of keep inflation within the U.S. somewhat trapped, and then the trade U.S. dollar, a different currency, which is what has essentially propped up China to the position they are now. They've been able to do that. They've been able to take their people from a fairly low economic position to a fairly middle class. Like China's fairly middle class for most of their population that are in the cities.
Walk me through that. How did China rise? They stole? Is it because socialism works, or is it because they were cheating the system? Like, how did that happen?
I don't think they're any of the things. Like they're the Communist Party, but they're not really that. They're kind of a hybrid of a lot of systems. I don't think it's just simply like they're communist or socialist. But the reason how they rose is because they benefit from the U.S. going this route and dumping all their manufacturing there. So all the manufacturing jobs went there. That brought up the pay and quality of life in China. U.S. got cheap goods, but eventually it broke down their society. So towns are empty. Manufactured towns are empty. People are on opiates. It was the U.S. that essentially brought up China, in my opinion. And it wasn't just through just necessary technologies, like IP stealing. They definitely did that, and it's impossible not to when you send your product there to have it made. Like they're going to look at how it's made. They know exactly every part of it. But the U.S. essentially paid for China to rise by buying all the goods, by moving the jobs there, giving them those jobs, and then buying the goods that they're making for a lower price. So I think it was the U.S. the West, but like the U.S. was the biggest economy buying stuff from China to let them grow as they did.
I think you sent me an article, or someone did, and the Chinese, they have a means. They have two currencies, and they have a means of forcing the American companies to keep the money in China. Is that true?
Yeah, that's what it is. So that's what the U.S. would probably do with their kind of internal and external. So if you have a company and you make money in China, it's under the one, I can't remember, there's two names to them, but it's under the internal currency. And for them to get it out, they can only get out a certain amount at certain times. They have very strong capital controls in what they do. So what happens within those companies is they tend to just reinvest that money back into another business within there, or another plant or something, and it keeps that money within the country, which is why I think the U.S. would do the same thing, because it would force U.S. companies to keep their money within the U.S. and expand probably within the U.S.
So like the company, it grows and they're still getting like their dividends and their profits yearly, to pay out the salaries and the bonuses, but the bulk of the money stays in there, and everyone's happy as long as they get their Christmas bonus.
Yep, yep. And it works. It works for it worked for Apple. It worked for these countries. When no one was forcing them not to do that, then it, their costs were lower, because the price of their stuff always went up. It's not like it went down with the cheaper labor at any point. It just they well, that's probably more so with like phones and stuff. But yeah, I think they were happy. Everyone was happy. It was a very good system for the people who were in certain positions within all around the globe. Like, it worked for them, but it was at the detriment of the U.S., the people, and even Canada, a lot of the countries. But the U.S., I'm just going to use that 'cause that was the main. I know that's the head, but it made the lives worse for Americans. Like, their wealth was dramatically reduced in this system.
I was again. I'm pretty sure it was you who sent me this video. I was listening to it on the flight over, and I kind of had this epiphany that China, the nation state of China, used the weak underbelly of America, which is the corporate greed. They used the corporations to siphon um, wealth, I guess, wealth away from the working class in America. Do you see where I'm going with this?
Oh yeah, it's not like China didn't know what was going on. Like, the people running, they're smart people, and they're not like, they plan 50 years at a time. Like, their plans, when you read their yearly plans, because they update all their long-term plans, they're 10, they're 20, and it's very detailed. And you can read other plans. They're transparent. Yeah, they knew that the U.S., it was helping them. It was helping people within the West, so not everybody, but their responsibility is not to the American people. Like, their responsibility is to try to bring up the people of China. So I get why they were doing what they were doing, and they knew what would happen to the other countries by doing this, but they were looking after their people, and they did a very good job. They did manage to bring a lot of people from poverty into middle class.
This probably falls under the category of it's free but not fair trade, like that
Yep.
China is interfering in this trade.
Yeah. Yeah, but I don't know about free trade. I think that's the I don't know if there's ever like perfectly free trade. I think that's just like a thing people like to say, um, because powerful groups, like, people are going to try to benefit themselves, like whatever. I know whether they're Americans or Canadians, companies sending stuff off. Like, when I used to watch Shark Tank, and they would have they'd come up like, well, how can we make this in China? There's like always every time. Oh, well, what if you made it in China? And that's a thought process, right? Like, okay, how do we do this, get it there, and cut the cost down as much as we can? So whether it's Kevin O'Leary that's the bad guy, or it's Xi Jinping that's the bad guy, I don't know. They both have the same incentives. They're both trying to make the most money for themselves. And there's never a nation in the West that was trying to help their people. All of the For a very long time, the elite of U.S., Canada, Europe have only been working for themselves. Obviously, working for themselves.
What do you think would be good trade policy? Just as little trade as possible.
Well, I don't know. I think if you try to trade the stuff that you can't get, so like Canada trying to get bananas from like South America makes a ton of sense. But if you can make it in your country, and your country can support the buying the stuff, buying the goods, and I think that's the best system. I think countries should absolutely control key industries. Like, you should like you, I think was it Trump, or might have been Trump, or somebody else was talking about, if your nation does not manufacture steel, you're not a nation. That's true. A nation has to control the manufacturing of steel, otherwise you can't build anything. You can't build your nation up. You're reliant, like, a very key product you're reliant on another country, and it shouldn't be. So there are key industries I think the nations have to absolutely control themselves and produce, and make sure they can at least produce enough for themselves. But I think, yeah, I think when you get into the realm where everyone's like the steel right now, how it comes, it's made in mostly China, comes to Canada, gets adjusted a little bit, and then gets sold into the US. Like, I think those systems, I think those are when things start to become a problem. They're just too intertwined, and they can be really they can be manipulated when those kind of supply chains happen.
Yeah, I guess the food supply is another one you could add to that,
Food, yeah,
and pharmaceuticals.
yeah, and I think a lot of people have found whatever you want to say with COVID, but the bottom line is we didn't make any of that stuff. Like, if that was real, then it would have been a problem because it was not made here. None of the stuff was made in the West. So yeah, I think there are key things that you should manage, and if you can produce more, or you have something that somebody else doesn't have, which is the case with energy, for example, this kind of stuff. If you have something that they don't have, then that's when it's to your advantage. Like, those are the places that have an advantage. The nations that don't have advantages, or can't create an economy where you at least self-supporting, you're in trouble. That's when they go to war. That's when they go and have to, like, take from somebody else. Like, that's history.
I think we've been moving in this direction for a while with like technological advances. So 40 years ago, you wanted to get a magazine, like you write a check, you send it in. But now with the credit cards, let's be honest, like that's what all the payment, everything has moved so much faster. And the fact that it's moved faster, it can be centralized. Like all the money is just being siphoned out of Canada. It's going to Netflix. It's going to YouTube.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, that's what that's what that Europe's attempting to do right now. Like, they're in trouble. So they're doing two things. They're changing their laws, so the EU Commission is able to control investing and spending accounts within all the nations. So let's just say you're in Germany, for example, so they can dictate and control where those savings go, and so your savings can now be invested in a stock. They're saying into their military, and into growing their military, growing these green products. That's what they're selling it as. That's what the EU is saying. But at the same time, they're advancing their digital currency. This wasn't supposed to be till 2027, but now they may be putting their active trial out this year. So the EU needs to do that so they can put capital controls on the savings and spending of all the all the people within the EU, and they're going quickly on that, because I think that currency is not going to be able to survive this currency war, this adjustment that the U.S. is trying to do. So they're going to try to tap the savings of EU citizens and force it into investments that they need.
Okay, so let's bring it back to the loonie dollar. You
Right.
have these. Donald Trump wants to devalue his currency. He wants to take control back into the U.S. And they parachute Mark Carney in, and he unleashes this euro dollar version in Canada.
Yeah. So it is just currency wars. So the Loonie-Dollar would essentially, it would devalue the Canadian dollar. So Carney is trying to devalue Canadian dollar, so the U.S. can't devalue the U.S. dollar enough, because let's just say they're on par. If the U.S. dollar and Canadian dollar are on par, it's gonna be tough for Canadian manufacturers to sell into the U.S. They have no currency advantage whatsoever. Like, what if you're making T-shirts in Ontario? You have no currency advantage to sell into the U.S. if you're at par. If the Canadian dollar is even higher, then what's made in the U.S. Someone in the U.S. is probably not even looking at buying T-shirts in Canada because it's just cheaper to buy within the U.S. So they're both attempting to devalue the currency. So Carney is doing this in an attempt to do a Canadian devalue, but it needs Alberta to be on board with this, because Alberta is most of the trade deficit. Like, most of the surplus trade is within the oil and gas. So I think he's the CEO of Bow Valley Credit Union. So it'd be like a smaller credit union within Alberta. I've never heard of them, but Jason Levine put out his paper talking about this. So it's interesting. I saw the Bank of Canada do this. I thought they were just selling their U.S. bonds that they had, or their treasuries, but they're actually issuing U.S. debt from the Canadian government. So I think he's right in what he's calling the Loonie-Dollar system. But simply, it's just Canada attempting to have a currency war against the U.S. to keep the U.S. dollar down.
Okay. Uh, there's a
Or
couple
Canadian,
of issues in there. Let's take them one by one. Hopefully, I'll
sure.
remember these. What's the logic in devaluing your currency, so inflating your money supply, which makes the value of Canadian dollars less, means everything's expensive, but you can you can increase your exports, which means the people make more money. Like, are we just running on a treadmill, like chasing
Well,
something we'll never catch?
I don't think Carney cares about what happens to Canada or what happens to necessarily the negative effects of the currency. He's just trying to defend or attack Trump's moves, and I think just an attempt really to delay as long as they can, because they're going to attempt to politically remove this movement. Like, it's not like it's solidified. They're doing very complicated things that can break stuff and can politically hurt them. So what Trump and that group of people are trying to do are difficult. Um, so Carney doing this just kind of delays. Like, I think it's a delay tactic, but they need someone who understands the financial gears, right? They can't have, it couldn't be trusted. It can't be Pierre. Pierre has no idea. He can have no chance like at defending this or even attempting these kind of ploys, right? Because someone who's making these decisions has to have that financial background to help any of the other kind of political decisions that are going to come in that could affect that plan. So that's why Carney is here, and that's why I think Pierre will just bow out or do what he's doing. I don't know if he's trying to throw it or it's just I don't know what he's doing. To me, it looks like he may be doing that. Yeah,
Okay.
but
Another
that's why.
question.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I'm done.
Oh, I was going to say another question. So their principal goal is to basically implode this Trump agenda. Okay,
Yeah.
fine. But Carney and specifically the people behind him, they're quite clever. So they're thinking a few steps ahead. When they do this and it impacts people negatively, people get even more poor in Canada. What are they going to do? Are they going to blame it on Trump? Are they hoping Trump is going to invade and they'll use that to shore up jingoism?
But Trump's not going to invade. I don't think he has to. I think he can. I think he can. If they can hold on long enough, they can economically break even Carney's plan. Like it's just it's they're still too big. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I'm watching people. I, I see the mob, like the average person. The average person. When I go to my son's hockey game and I listen to these people, parents talk, they're totally buying all these problems will come from Trump. They're buying it. So, and even the people who I think were more sympathetic to Trump are upset with him, and rightfully so. Like what he is doing is going to have an absolute negative effect on Canada, but he's not doing it to attack Canada. He's doing it to help his nation. So, I think they could for a time. Like, again, how long can they do this? This is going to be a back and forth. Who can outlast? What other moves can you put into it? But yes, I think they're gonna. If there is any currency problems, spikes in inflation, this kind of stuff, I think they'll blame Trump, and I think it'll work. And it kind of is true. They're not really lying, but they're also not going to say that we're doing things to help this, because the average person's not going to look into like what financial instruments they're using in this that will accelerate the the currency devaluation of the Canadian dollar.
So how is it that Trump would not just freak out and maybe not invade militarily, but at least posture that they're going to destroy Canada if we're counterfeiting U.S. dollars in this loony dollar system?
I I think their play is not going to be like an invasion. Their play is go all in on pulling Alberta out, because if they pull Alberta out, there goes their. They don't even care about what they do with this the currency manipulation, because it wouldn't affect them, because they will just stop buying the other stuff and they'll have their energy, and then Canada will be in a tough spot. I don't know what they'll do if that piece of the economy is pulled out of Canada. I don't know what they would do. I think they'd have a hard time supporting what they're trying to, all of their programs. They'd have a very hard time keeping Quebec. Essentially, Alberta's equalization payments to Quebec is just like bribe money to keep Quebec within Canada. So they may lose. I think if that money goes away, they have problems in Quebec. I think the Quebec separatists make a good move, and they might even pull up. They'll get their way. So I think all the U.S. has to do is put efforts into pulling out Alberta, which is
When you
what I
say
think the 50 make Alberta the 51st state. I think that's why the language is 51st state. It wasn't Canada. It wasn't everything. It was Alberta.
okay, so you mean actually like Alberta separates and joins
That's
as a
right.
state?
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
assuming that doesn't, but like let's assume that doesn't happen.
yeah.
Um, you mentioned that Alberta might not go along with Ottawa's plan. How would it not go along?
So he put out some that this the CEO of the credit union. I think his idea probably isn't going to work. But he said what Alberta could do is they could sell all their oil in gold. So his idea was gold. It just has to be something else besides U.S. dollars. But he proposed gold. If you sell it all in gold, then that removes the energy trade, all that out of this Loonie-Dollar system. It just takes it out of it, and that's the same kind of the same thing as removing Alberta from Canada as far as the trade side goes, the currency side goes. So he proposed that, and it is interesting because Alberta just they just made a change where they're now accepting oil instead of money uh, for all their royalties. So essentially, all these oil companies pay Alberta royalties for the amount of oil that they pull out. That's how Alberta funds its government essentially. So instead of taking money, they're taking oil. So then they can sell that oil themselves in some means to buyers. So instead of like the oil company taking the oil out, giving Alberta some money, and then selling the oil themselves, Alberta is actually taking that oil as the currency, and then they're going to sell that. So that's kind of it looks like they're staging up for that being an option. So Alberta being able to sell their oil in something else besides currency. It won't be all of it because Alberta doesn't get all of the oil, but it would be a percentage. Whatever I think the royalties are 12% or 13% or something like that. So it's a decent amount of oil that the Alberta government is taking control of. Um, so that's one way. That's one way without pulling it out is essentially selling oil and gas, not with U.S. dollars, to using something else, and not Canadian. It could be Canadian and it could be USD. It has to be in something else.
You know, I'm struggling with one thing. You have this counterfeiting operation, the Loonie-Dollar. So Carney is going to sell U.S. denominated debt, which is going to hurt the U.S. because it's going to inflate their money supply in a way that they can't control, even though the Canadian economy is small.
Mm-hmm.
What does that have to do with Alberta selling money selling oil in U.S. dollars?
Because right now, if you look at the exports of the Canadian exports, oil and gas is was it 40%? It's a very high percentage of all the exports that Canada has to the U.S. And it's almost all the surplus. So like the difference between the two, it's all because the U.S. buys a lot of oil and gas. So if you can remove that chunk, it's just revenues from a country. If you can remove that chunk out of the equation, then there's not much that the rest of Canada is really selling to the U.S. and the U.S. doesn't even need it. The U.S. could just
I
go, oh,
Let me jump in. Actually, I'm just trying to dumb it down because
okay.
you're an astronaut on this stuff. Um, is it basically that Alberta would not Alberta is buying Canadian dollars from Ottawa? Is that the issue to transact in those dollars?
Well, as far as like the oil and gas trade, it's all in U.S. dollars. None of it's in Canadian dollars. Totally separate.
I just don't see how selling oil and gold would help the U.S.
It just means you're not. If you got to think of currency as like a product, like it's just a thing. It's like a T-shirt. Like if you had a so um instead of selling it in U.S. So the Alberta government has to get U.S. dollars. So they have to convert Canadian dollars to U.S. dollars. So they're buying a thing. Um, so instead of selling it in that thing U.S. dollars, they sell it in gold, and they'll take gold back, and then they can convert gold to whatever they want. They can convert gold in Canadian dollars. They can convert gold in whatever they want. At least that way, it's not all going through one product, which is the USD. They want to stop using US. If the USD is the tool that's being manipulated, they need to remove that product out of it so it can't be manipulated.
No, okay, I see. It basically gives Carney less leverage.
Takes away all his products. Like let's just say the dollar amounts are all like it's all your money. If you took away 40% of it, you don't have as many, you're not as powerful, right? And if the remainder stuff that you have, they don't even need, they actually don't need it. They don't need these parts, car parts necessarily. They don't need these things. If they didn't need those things, and they could just go, there's no leverage. Canada has no leverage in that case. The only leverage Canada has is the only thing the U.S. actually needs. And Trump can say we don't need oil and gas. It's a lie. It's an absolute lie. They can't turn it off. There's nothing producing that amount daily consistently. Is a lie when he says it. It's just his negotiating tactic. They absolutely need it, and that oil and gas is the only leverage Canada has over the U.S. That's it. So if Trump by taking that, by putting it to gold or something else, or removing Alberta, that takes away all the leverage Canada has over the U.S.
Again, let me dumb this down. Ottawa wants to commit a crime, counterfeiting. The leverage it has is if it can say to America, if you don't let me commit this crime, I won't sell you my oil. Is that what's going on?
The two things happen at the same time. So Carney could be doing the crime, and then Alberta could sell oil and gold, right? They could do two things at the same time, but his crime won't have as much of an effect if he doesn't have that trade under his system as well. Doesn't have the Alberta economy under his control as well. So they can both, and I think he's going to try to do both at the same time. Like I think it's going to be we're doing this. The U.S. is going to counter move it. Alberta is going to go, which way do we go? Because they're kind of in a tough spot. They I don't think, no, I don't know if Danielle would actually want to leave, but she's going to be forced. They're forcing the Alberta or the Western elites to make a decision here, like which way are you going to go? And we're seeing language from Smith be very direct at this point. That this is your last chance to fast track these energy projects. Show us that you are going to work with us to get this out. I think this is the last ask from the Western gang of elites in Canada to the Eastern.
So I'm just trying to. I'm going back to this. If Alberta transacts in gold, they basically don't need Ottawa. Like Ottawa's power is in the printing press, right? Like they're the ones that provide the Canadian dollars.
Well, yes, but I actually they are two separate things. But what Ottawa could do to pressure on Alberta, and they've been doing it. They can do a lot of political pressure. Like Ottawa still manages a lot of parts of Alberta, like not just like the oil and gas trade. They manage health transfer payments. They have a lot of things that they can hold over the politicians in Alberta that they can go after them for. But as far as selling into the U.S. or doing this kind of stuff, it is independent. It is a provincial decision. There's not much that Canada could really do to stop it beyond some really extreme kind of political things that attacking other parts of the province, not just oil trade. So health, all these different regulatory areas that they control over the provinces, the parks, national
Let me
parks.
ask the question a different way. Is this going to be U.S. policy going forward that any energy they're going to purchase, they'll do it through physical gold or just gold?
I think what the U.S.'s number one goal is to control it, have it. I think they want it as a 51st state. That's number one. If they can't get that, then I think that they will work with another system. And maybe if they go to this internal external currency, the deal would be all the oil and gas sales go to this internal, and that would be a way to push out
Carney.
the Carney from that. Now that's just complicated. That move is probably the biggest move they'd be doing. But yeah, that would be another way. That would be like, okay, we tried this and this. We'll try to do it under this system. But it just has to be something other than the current U.S. dollar. It doesn't have to be gold. It can be, if they make a new currency, if they made this, they started just their internal currency, that could work as well. I think to sell the oil to U.S.
I keep interrupting you because we got maybe 10 minutes. If they came up with an internal U.S. dollar, And I mean, what's to stop the Europe or Canada from doing another euro dollar on that internal dollar?
because that would be like that's only issued within from the US. Like that wouldn't be. I guess what would stop maybe probably that point force. I think you're getting to if they did start doing something like that. I don't know how China has stopped them for other countries from doing that. I don't know if it's just been we're fine with it, or if it's actually a case of there are means that they can control it. I'm guessing that there are more financial tools and controls they could have on within that system.
All right, let's
But
just go.
it's all capital controls as far as like letting money out in and out. So I think that's how they force the people within the country to adhere to their rules.
All right, let's go to Dissident Canada. He's also a monetary expert, so I'm just going to read it. These Canadian bonds denominated in USD are most likely to fund the government temporarily for the election because the government runs out of funding on the 31st. No parliament sitting means more creative funding. Thoughts?
Yeah, we'll see. Like this. This is a very this is like a late night idea that this guy put out there that Jason put out there, and I thought maybe that makes sense. That is a way to do it. It's not they haven't stated that that's what they're doing. Like this is really an early idea that this CEO at this credit union is thinking that they're doing. Like this is his idea, and it makes sense. It would work. It made sense to me as far as a way to keep the Canadian dollar down in this currency war. But we'll have to see. We'll see how they go with it. It was a one time thing that they did. It's not like they haven't issued any details on this beyond what they did. So yeah, he could be right.
And do you know what this is? Nobody wants the RMB. That's why.
Yeah, is there going to be the? I think it's the internal. I think I have my notes here. The internal is one. Um, well, no one wants it outside. If that's the internal, then yeah, absolutely no one wants the internal Chinese currency. It is a problem for these companies. Like the fact that they have to like keep it within the country and use it and only are allowed to convert so much to the external to take out. Like that's where they can control. Like okay, you're allowed X amount to convert from this internal to the external every quarter. I don't know what the schedule is, but that's how they control you taking it out, and they can't take everything out. But yeah, no one's going to want the internal currency of this country. Only the people. It's only meant to to control inflation and the cost of money within a nation. Like that's why they have the internal and external, and so the external trade can affect the internal pricing.
More
Yeah, I don't
control.
think it makes sense why you would want it. Yeah,
Eh,
yeah,
And I don't know. Finally, Dissident, you're taking advantage of my good nature, bringing up all your comments. Aramco does this all the time.
yeah. So Aramco to Saudi Arabia, like the oil and gas from the Saudis. Um, yeah, yeah. Well, it makes sense. The stuff that the Chinese policy, I don't think is a bad policy. Not for the Chinese people. It's not great for other countries, but these other countries and companies played ball because it was an advantage to them. They did get lower costs. They did get it. Like there was an advantage, even though their IP was taken and you could buy knockoff copies of this on whatever. Now even on Amazon. Before it was only on Alibaba and that, but now Amazon's even selling the knockoff stuff even ahead of the actual ones, the actual product. So Amazon, an American company, has no problem. Right? They have no problem going along with that as well. So
Yeah, well, I got governed. I'm gonna abruptly have to end this. I got to run. I got another interview, but thanks for coming on.
no problem. That's good talk.
Sorry for the audience if you see the hamster wheel spinning in my mind. This stuff sometimes goes over my head.
Yeah. Well, and we're talking some of the things we're talking about. It's not for sure. We're just speculating, and it was a speculation on a speculation, I guess, with the Loonie-Dollar. But it makes sense. Well, I guess we'll see. We're gonna watch it and see if that's a tactic. But that's the kind of stuff that Carney's here to do. Like that's why they would bring him, and that's why the Canadian elites would go, yeah, we need Carney over Pierre. Like Pierre's not he's not special in this category. He made some Roman videos on how the Romans devalued their silver, but that's I don't think he actually understands it. He just got the script.
Well, we'll see what happens. They might call an election on Sunday. So
Yeah, I think they will. You're gonna be busy.
Yeah, this is just what I need. Yeah, this is the opposite of a vacation. All right, buddy. Thank you very much for coming on
Okay.
and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.